All right, ready to dive into some more fascinating history.
Always.
Today, we're heading to the Pacific, to a nation you might not hear much about, Tuvalu.
Ah, Tuvalu. It's incredible, isn't it? How such a small place can hold such a big history.
Seriously, we're talking an island nation barely bigger than a large airport. But it's got this past, this story that's anything but small. And we've got some great sources to uncover it all. One right from the Tuvaluan government and another from, well, you can't go wrong with Wikipedia.
A solid combo. So what kind of stuff are we talking here?
Well, buckle up because we've got remnants of World War II, a totally unexpected link to Charles Darwin, even some good old-fashioned international intrigue sprinkled in.
Sounds like it'll blow the tiny island nation stereotype right out of the water.
Exactly. So first things first, got to set the scene. Imagine thousands of years ago, Polynesian seafarers, master navigators, voyaging across the vast Pacific.
And they land on these islands, making them their home, building a culture, a way of life, all tied to this unique environment. It's mind-boggling, the scale of those journeys. But then, fast forward to the 16th century, and bam, European explorers show up.
And that, right there, is where things get really interesting. You've got this ancient Polynesian culture, thriving for centuries, suddenly encountering a totally different worldview.
Not always in the most respectful way either. Like one explorer, he just names an island Ilha de Jesus, simply because he happened to spot it on a religious feast day.
Talk about imposing your own perspective. And it wasn't just naming, right? You see Tuvalu getting caught in the middle of these competing colonial powers. Spain, Britain.
Even the USA briefly tried to claim some of the islands, all thanks to the Guano Islands Act. Talk about a weird footnote in history.
Right, all over bird poop. But it shows you how these seemingly insignificant islands could become pawns in these bigger global games.
So we've got this backdrop of Polynesian roots meeting European exploration, and then things get even wilder when the traders start showing up in the 19th century.
And these guys weren't just passing through. Some of them really embedded themselves in Tuvaluan society. Like there's this guy, John O'Brien, settles on Funafuti in the 1850s, marries a chief's daughter. That's some serious commitment.
Talk about going native. And then you've got Louis Beck, later becomes this famous writer, but got his start as a trader in Tuvalu. Must have been a wild time.
Imagine the stories those guys could tell. But it wasn't all just adventure and exotic locales. This was a period of major transformation for Tuvalu.
Yeah, it wasn't just about trading goods. You see the introduction of new religions, new economic systems.
And ultimately, the erosion of the traditional Kaitasi system of land ownership.
Kaitasi is fascinating, right? This system of communal ownership that had been in place for centuries.
So, like, everyone shared responsibility for the land?
Yeah.
Based on their family ties and the needs of the community?
Exactly, a really early form of sustainable living. But the arrival of these European traders, with their focus on individual ownership and profit, it started to undermine that whole system.
And sometimes that clash of values led to some pretty dramatic situations. Like Vaitupu, one of the islands, almost got seized by a German trading firm over a debt.
Can you imagine? An entire island held hostage by a company. The debt was something like $13,000.
Huge money back then. But the islanders, they managed to pull together, paid it off. And now they celebrate Happy Day every year to commemorate that victory.
Talk about resilience. And that resilience, it shows up again and again in Tuvalu's history, even in their contributions to science.
Wait, Tuvalu and science. Now that I got to hear about.
Well, you know Charles Darwin's theory of atoll formation, groundbreaking stuff, right? Turns out that theory was actually proven by drilling right into Funafuti.
No way. So this tiny island nation played a part in one of the biggest scientific discoveries of its time.
Yep. Darwin had this idea that atolls, these ring-shaped coral islands, they form over millions of years as volcanic islands slowly sink beneath the sea. To test it, scientists in the late 19th century, they decided to drill right into Funafuti, the capital island of Tuvalu.
So they basically turned the island into a giant experiment.
Pretty much. And the results were groundbreaking. They found layers of coral that confirmed Darwin's theory, revolutionized our understanding of these unique landforms.
So we've got Polynesian seafarers, European explorers, traders, scientists, all leaving their mark on Tuvalu. But then World War II hits, and things get even more intense.
Yeah, this peaceful island nation gets thrown right into the middle of a global conflict, transformed into a U.S. military base.
Airstrips built right through villages, coconut plantations razed to the ground. It must have been a complete upheaval of their way of life.
Absolutely. The sources mention over 55,000 coconut trees being lost. That's not just scenery, that's livelihoods, food sources, the whole cultural landscape. And the scars of the war, they're still visible today. You've got remnants of military equipment, infrastructure. At Nanumea, there's even the American Passage, a channel blasted through the reef to let ships into the lagoon.
Wow. So even today, you can see how these global events reshape the physical landscape of Tuvalu. It's amazing how even a tiny nation like this gets swept up in the currents of history.
It really shows you that no place is truly isolated. And it makes you wonder what happened next.
Well, that's where we're headed next. From wartime upheaval to the fight for independence.
And ultimately, the challenge that looms largest over Tuvalu today, climate change.
Buckle up, folks, because things are about to get even more interesting.
All right, so picture this. World War II ends, and you've got this global wave of decolonization sweeping the planet, and right there, in the middle of it all, is Tuvalu.
Ready to forge their own path. But hold on. At this point, they're still part of the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony, right? Under British rule. How does a tiny nation even begin to break away from that?
Well, a big part of it was this growing sense of a distinct Tuvaluan identity. They had their own language, their own culture, a way of life distinct from the Gilbertese, who were the other main group in the colony.
So kind of like internal tensions brewing within the colony itself.
Exactly. And it wasn't just cultural, it was political too.
Yeah.
The Tuvaluans were a minority, and they were worried about being marginalized, losing control over their own affairs. They wanted a say in their own future.
I get it. It's like being the younger sibling, always having to follow the older one's lead. Eventually, you want to do your own thing.
Perfect analogy. And that desire for self-determination, it reached a tipping point in 1974. They held a referendum on separation.
And the result?
Overwhelmingly in favor of separation. A resounding yes to independence.
So that was it. They voted, and boom, independent nation.
Well, not quite that simple. There were negotiations with the British, a constitution to draft. But that referendum, that was the crucial step. It showed the world what the Tuvaluan people wanted.
And finally, in 1978, they got it.
Right.
Independence. What a moment that must have been.
A culmination of years of effort, a testament to their determination to control their own destiny. But achieving independence, that was just the beginning of a whole new set of challenges.
Especially when you're a tiny island nation in a world that's not always so friendly to the little guy.
And when you're facing a challenge unlike any other, we can't talk about Tuvalu without talking about climate change.
Right. It's not just some abstract concept for them. It's an existential threat. I mean, we're talking about a nation that at its highest point is only about 15 feet above sea level.
Rising sea levels, more intense storms, coastal erosion, it's all happening right now.
It's almost unimaginable to have your entire homeland, your culture, your way of life literally threatened by the rising tide.
There's this quote from Tuvalu's Governor General speaking to the United Nations. He said, "We are sinking, but so is everyone else." A powerful message, right?
It really puts things in perspective. Climate change isn't some far-off problem. It's happening right now, and it's affecting real people in very real ways.
And for Tuvalu, it's not just about politics or economics, it's about survival. Their very identity is at stake.
So what are they doing about it? Are they just accepting their fate, or are they fighting back?
Oh, they're definitely fighting back. They've been incredibly vocal on the international stage, at the UN and other forums, raising awareness about the urgency of climate change, demanding action from the bigger, more industrialized nations.
It's like David versus Goliath, demanding to be heard.
Exactly. And they're not just talking, they're taking action too, implementing measures to protect their coastlines, manage water resources, making their communities more resilient. They're even exploring options for relocating their population if the worst happens.
It's heartbreaking to think they might have to abandon their homeland.
It is, but it also speaks to their incredible resilience and their determination to survive. Now, turning to something a bit lighter, their culture before Christianity is fascinating. It wasn't one unified religion. Each island had its own set of deities, spirits, rituals.
So like a spiritual choose-your-own-adventure, each island with its own unique flavor.
That's a great way to put it. And their beliefs were deeply intertwined with the natural world. They saw power in nature. Thunder, lightning, the ocean.
Makes sense when you're living on these small islands surrounded by this vast expanse of water.
Over time, ancestor worship and the veneration of spirits also became really important. Spirits associated with animals, plants, even specific places.
Any examples? Like what kind of spirits did they believe in?
Well, there was Tufakala, a powerful spirit named after a seagull. He was believed to have created the islands, so they would call on him for protection and guidance.
A seagull spirit creating islands. That's awesome. Did every island have its own spirit animal, or were there some that were common across the islands?
It wasn't quite like having a spirit animal, more like recognizing the spiritual power within everything. And yeah, some spirits were more widespread, while others were specific to certain islands or families.
Okay, so you've got these diverse spiritual beliefs, this close connection to nature. What are the priests? What was their role?
They were known as Vakaatua, which means spirit masters. They acted as intermediaries between the people and the spirit world, performing rituals, offering sacrifices, providing guidance on all aspects of life.
So they held a lot of power and respect within the community.
Absolutely. They were responsible for the community's well-being, from successful fishing to protection from harm. Their advice was highly valued. Then, with the arrival of European traders, Christianity starts to spread. Did that cause any conflicts? It definitely brought big changes. The arrival of Christianity wasn't always peaceful. Sometimes traders would push their religion, whether for genuine reasons or for economic gain.
So conversion as a way to gain influence, a kind of spiritual conquest.
In some cases, yeah. But it's important to remember that the adoption of Christianity was complex. Some embraced it wholeheartedly, while others held on to their traditional beliefs.
So it wasn't a simple replacement of one religion with another, more like a blending of different belief systems.
Exactly. And you can still see that blending today. Elements of Christianity mixed with traditional practices, creating a unique belief system.
Shows how cultures adapt and evolve, right? Finding ways to incorporate new ideas while holding on to their core values.
Adaptability is a defining trait of Tuvaluan culture. You see it in their religion, in their political journey. Remember, they were under British administration for decades.
Right, as part of the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony. How did that shape their development as a nation?
It was a double-edged sword. They learned from the colonial system, but they also felt its limitations, which fueled their desire for independence.
And that path towards independence wasn't easy.
No, they were a minority group within the colony. They worried about losing control over their own affairs.
So they started advocating for separation.
Exactly. And ultimately, their efforts led to that crucial referendum in 1974, paving the way for their independence in 1978.
It's impressive how they navigated that political landscape and achieved self-determination. But I imagine independence didn't mean the end of their challenges, right?
You're right. And one of the biggest challenges, maybe the biggest they've ever faced, nature itself. They're incredibly vulnerable to cyclones, tsunamis.
Makes sense, being smack dab in the middle of the Pacific. But it must be terrifying to live with that constant threat.
It is. They've endured some devastating events, like the cyclone that hit Funafuti in 1883. It wiped out almost everything. Then there was Cyclone Bebe in 72, caused widespread damage and loss of life.
And more recently, Cyclone Pam in 2015. I remember that one. Caused a ton of damage, displaced a huge chunk of the population.
Yeah, a stark reminder of how vulnerable they are.
Yeah.
And it's not just cyclones. They've dealt with tsunamis, other extreme weather.
It's incredible they've managed to rebuild and adapt so many times.
It speaks volumes about their resilience and their strong community spirit. They come together during tough times and support each other, but now they face climate change. This isn't just a one-off disaster. It's an ongoing crisis that could literally erase them.
So they celebrate their resilience against past cyclones, but now face this uncertain future because of climate change.
It's a future that needs global action and cooperation. What happens to Tuvalu affects us all. Now, shifting gears a bit, how about we talk about their education system? I'm curious to learn how they approach learning and knowledge. Great idea. Tuvalu's education system has a unique story, shaped by internal factors and outside influences.
So how did education even get started there? Was it always a priority?
Formal education really got going in the late 19th century with Christian missionaries. The London Missionary Society was instrumental in establishing schools and spreading literacy.
Ah, so religion and education hand in hand, like in many places back then.
Exactly. Early schools focused a lot on religious instruction, along with basic literacy and math skills.
But I imagine access was limited, especially for those on the outer islands.
You're right. For a long time, the only secondary school was in the Gilbert Islands. Tuvaluan students had to travel far from home to continue their education.
Must have been tough on both the students and their families.
It was. It shows the sacrifices they made for educational opportunities and the challenges of providing good education across scattered islands.
When did that change? When did they get their own secondary schools?
After independence, there was a push for a more localized education system. They realized they needed to educate their own people, create a curriculum relevant to Tuvaluan culture and needs.
So not just expanding access, but shaping the content too.
Exactly. They wanted education to prepare students for life in Tuvalu, the good and the bad.
And that led to Motufua Secondary School on Vaitupu.
That's right. It became the main secondary school for Tuvaluan students, making it easier for those on the outer islands.
A big step forward. What about higher education? Do they have universities in Tuvalu?
Not yet. Students wanting to go further usually study abroad, often in Fiji, Australia, or New Zealand.
Still reliant on other countries for certain levels of education.
To some degree. But they are working to expand their own educational infrastructure.
Okay, so we talked about the history. What about today? What's the education system like now?
There's been progress, but they face hurdles. One of the biggest is limited resources, especially on those outer islands. Teacher shortages, inadequate facilities, lack of technology.
I can imagine the internet and computers are essential these days. Must be tough to provide that in a place like Tuvalu.
It is, but they're working on it, trying to improve internet connectivity and bring technology into classrooms.
So despite these challenges, it seems like there's a real dedication to education in Tuvalu.
Definitely. They see education as crucial for their development as a nation, for empowering their people and preparing future generations.
Speaking of challenges, we've focused on climate change. But what about internal issues? Are there any conflicts or social tensions within Tuvalu?
One issue that's often overlooked is land ownership. Tuvalu has this long tradition of communal ownership, the Kaitasi system we talked about earlier. But with modernization and individual ownership, there have been tensions.
Traditional practices clashing with modern influences again.
Exactly. Kaitasi was about kinship ties, shared responsibility. Everyone had a role in managing the land, ensuring the well-being of the community.
And individual ownership complicated things.
It did. Suddenly, people were claiming specific plots, leading to disputes over boundaries, inheritance, how the land was used.
Created a legal and social mess.
In a way, yes. It's an ongoing challenge, finding a balance between the traditional system and a modern economy, legal framework.
Sounds tricky. So we've got land disputes,
Yeah.
the looming threat of climate change. What other pressing issues are they facing?
Like many island nations, they have limited resources and economic opportunities. They rely heavily on foreign aid and money sent back from Tuvaluans living abroad.
Sustainable income is a major concern then.
Absolutely. They're trying to develop industries like fishing and tourism, but it's not easy.
And I imagine climate change makes it even harder, impacting tourism and the economy.
It's a complex web of challenges, all interconnected.
Despite all that, there's something inspiring about Tuvalu. This small nation against huge odds, yet they keep fighting, keep adapting.
Their resilience is remarkable, and they do it with this grace and humor that's contagious.
Speaking of which, let's talk about something a bit more uplifting.
Yeah.
Their culture. What about their art and music? What makes Tuvalu culturally unique?
Their cultural heritage is vibrant.
Okay, where do we start? What are the key elements of Tuvaluan art and music?
Their art is very much tied to their practical skills, their everyday life. You see beautiful designs in their weaving, mat making, even fishing hook decorations.
So it's about bringing beauty and meaning to everyday objects and activities, not just art for art's sake.
Exactly. And they love using natural materials, shells, plant fibers, natural dyes. It shows their deep connection to nature.
Makes sense, given their environment.
Yeah,
Using what's around them to create beautiful and functional things.
absolutely. Their motifs often reflect their belief and relationship with nature. You see patterns inspired by waves, marine life, birds.
What about tattoos? I know many Polynesian cultures have strong tattooing traditions. Does Tuvalu?
They do, and they played a big role historically. Tattoos marked life events, social status, personal identity.
So more than decoration, it was a way of communicating who you are within the community.
Exactly. The designs were intricate, with symbolic patterns that held deep meaning.
Amazing how a tattoo can carry so much weight. Are those traditions still practiced today?
To some extent, yes. It's not as common as it once was, but there's a resurgence of interest in reviving these art forms, efforts to preserve those old designs and techniques. Some young Tuvaluans are getting traditional tattoos to connect with their heritage.
That's awesome. It's so important to keep those traditions alive, especially with globalization and the tendency for cultures to become more similar.
I agree. These traditions are part of Tuvalu's heritage and part of our shared human story. They show us the diversity and creativity of human expression.
Well said. Okay, we've covered a lot today, from their ancient past and beliefs to modern challenges and their vibrant culture. What's one thing you hope our listener will take away about Tuvalu?
I hope they recognize the incredible resilience and resourcefulness of the Tuvaluan people. They've faced so many challenges colonization, natural disasters, and now climate change, yet they've held on to their culture, their traditions, their community spirit. Their story is truly inspiring. It shows the strength of the human spirit and our ability to adapt and overcome.
And it's a reminder that even the smallest nations can make a big impact on the world. Tuvalu may be tiny, but their voice on the global stage is getting louder as they advocate for climate action and raise awareness for other vulnerable island nations. Their story is a call to action for all of us to listen and do our part to address the challenges facing our planet.
I couldn't agree more. Tuvalu's story is a microcosm of the challenges facing humanity in the 21st century. It's a story of resilience, adaptation, and the urgent need for global cooperation.
Okay, so we've talked about music and dance, but I'm curious about other forms of art in Tuvalu. What else can you tell us about their artistic traditions?
Well, one thing that's really striking is how their art is so intertwined with their everyday lives. It's not just something they create for display or aesthetic purposes, it's embedded in their practical skills and the objects they use every day.
So it's like their artistry is woven into the fabric of their existence.
Exactly. You see this in their intricate weaving patterns, the beautiful designs they create on mats, even the way they decorate fishing hooks. It's all about infusing beauty and meaning into the things they use and interact with on a daily basis.
That's fascinating. It speaks to a deep respect for craftsmanship and a desire to make even the most mundane objects aesthetically pleasing. Are there any particular materials or motifs that are common in their art?
They have a strong tradition of using natural materials, things like shells, fibers from plants, and dyes derived from local flora. This connection to nature is really evident in their artistic choices.
It makes sense considering their environment. Surrounded by the ocean and all its bounty, it's only natural that they would incorporate those elements into their art.
Absolutely. And their motifs often reflect their cultural beliefs and their relationship with the natural world. You'll see patterns inspired by waves, marine life, birds, and other elements from their surroundings.
And what about tattooing? I've heard that many Polynesian cultures have rich tattooing traditions. Is that true for Tuvalu as well?
Yes, absolutely. Tuvalu has its own unique tattooing practices, which historically played a significant role in their culture. Tattoos were used to mark important life events, to denote social status, and to express personal identity.
So it was more than just body decoration. It was a way of communicating who you were and where you belonged within the community.
Precisely. And the designs themselves were often intricate and meaningful, incorporating symbols and patterns that held deep cultural significance.
It's incredible how something like a tattoo can carry so much weight, both personally and culturally. Are these tattooing traditions still practiced today?
To some extent, yes. While the practice isn't as widespread as it once was, there's been a renewed interest in recent years in reviving these traditional art forms. There are efforts to document the old designs and techniques, and some younger Tuvaluans are choosing to get traditional tattoos as a way of connecting with their heritage.
That's really encouraging to hear. It's so important to preserve these cultural treasures, especially in the face of globalization and the homogenization of cultures.
I completely agree. These traditions are not just part of Tuvalu's heritage, they're part of our shared human story, and they enrich our understanding of the diversity and creativity of human expression.
Well said. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, from Tuvalu's ancient origins to their modern-day struggles and their vibrant cultural traditions. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you think our listeners should know about Tuvalu? Any final thoughts or insights?
I think the key takeaway is that Tuvalu is a nation of incredible resilience and resourcefulness. They faced countless challenges throughout their history, from colonization to natural disasters to the existential threat of climate change, and yet they've managed to preserve their unique culture, their traditions, and their spirit of community. Their story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and our capacity to adapt and overcome even the most daunting obstacles.
And it's a reminder that even the smallest nations can have a profound impact on the world. Tuvalu may be tiny in size, but their voice on the global stage is growing louder as they continue to advocate for climate action and raise awareness about the plight of vulnerable island nations. Their story is a call to action for all of us to pay attention, to listen, and to do our part to address the challenges facing our planet.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Tuvalu's story is a powerful reminder that we're all interconnected and that the choices we make today will have a ripple effect across the globe, impacting generations to come.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. It's been an incredible journey, and I hope our listener has gained a newfound appreciation for this remarkable nation and its people.
Me too. Tuvalu may be small, but their story is vast and full of valuable lessons for us all.
And if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to delve deeper into the sources we've explored today and to seek out other perspectives on Tuvalu's history, culture, and their ongoing fight for survival.
There's a whole world of knowledge waiting to be discovered, and Tuvalu's story is just one piece of that intricate and ever-evolving tapestry.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep questioning the world around you.